Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And I wonder what the hands of God are like. If God is a carpenter, are those hands calloused? Are they scarred from all the things that have broken, the sharp edges of this world that God has sanded down to make more palatable? If God is a gardener, is there dirt under the fingernails? Are there splinters in God's hands from flipping tables? And if I am made in God's image, does that mean that God has a bad habit of fingernail biting too? Or are God's hands soft and tender like a parent's? Hands that are accustomed to holding a child or a beloved, a parent to both a newborn and the elderly, a parent to a son dying right in front of their eyes, hands that wipe tears away. Do God's hands have spaces between the fingers with creased knuckles? Can we puzzle piece our hands into God's? And how do God's hands even hold the Spirit? Is the Spirit not a fluid thing, a substance that would run through God's fingers? Must God cup their hands, leaving no cracks in hope that Jesus' Spirit does not overflow? Prayer does not always account for the logistics. It leaves us wanting to know how and why. How will God's hands hold the entrusted Spirit? Why must Jesus die in the first place? Jesus dies with another man's prayer in his mouth. In Psalm 31, the psalmist says, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." Except in this prayer, the prayer lives. These are not last words, but instead a prayer, a petition to save the psalmist from plight. The psalmist truly believes that God's hands, whatever they may be like, will save him, pluck him out of his adversaries and into the safety of God's refuge. Jesus quotes a living man's prayer in his dying breath, a prayer that may have saved others, but will not save him. God's hands do not emerge from a torn veil, pluck him from the cross, and restore him to his friends and family. As Jesus takes his final breath, there are people scattered around, watching, waiting, and holding their own, waiting to see God's graceful and merciful hands act in such a scene of violence and injustice. But no hands come down from the heavens or up from the earth to pluck Jesus off that cross. And those gathered, witnessing the last words and the death, wonder why Jesus utters these last words. If they saved the psalmist, why did they not save him? Jesus was not known for giving explanations or offering the logic of his puzzling prayers or parables. He was not afraid to leave people confused and unsure. Often he left people wanting. But now, of all times, like many of Jesus's parables and prayers, these last words were not really meant for Jesus himself, but for those listening to him. In his last breaths, he mustered up the energy to speak loudly and quote a psalm that certainly the people would know. In quoting this line, he reminds the listeners of the context and of the author, the psalmist, who doesn't know the logistics of how or why, who truly and fully believes that God's hands will save him. Jesus knows his fate, yet gives up his spirit to the hands unseen. In his last breath, Jesus offers no explanations. There is no logic to this prayer, just a commitment to trust the hands that we cannot see to hold him.